Okay. Good morning.
Morning, Ali.
And welcome to Let's Be Frank. Today we are talking about expectations. Expectation. And it's been on our list of things to talk about for a little while. I think it was sparked by a quote that you heard or read somewhere or were told. I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
the quote was that expectation is the opposite of relationship. If you want to explain that a little bit.
Well, I found it interesting. I think so many of us are caught up frequently with having certain expectations, and then reality is slightly different
Yeah.
to our expectations. And the context in which I heard the quote, talking about relationships, whether that is with a spouse or a partner or a colleague, and that so often these expectations that we have is the opposite of relationship, of building on that relationship. And for me it comes to the kind of the unspoken or the unidentified expectations that we have.
Such as?
Well, such as the way that people will behave.
Or react to a situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In other words, those things that we don't have any control over.
Yeah.
But if we think about it in a work context, if I ask you to do something, and I'm not clear in terms of the expectation,
Yeah.
then it can go wrong.
Yeah.
And I think just in general we suck at that.
Yeah. Well,
Making sure that we set the expectation correctly.
Yeah. Well, it's also that quote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, which comes up a lot.
Yeah.
But thinking that you know what the other person expects or wants, or and not actually being clear about those things.
Yeah, so that's an interesting angle.
Yeah.
Just kind of from both sides. When I say something or I ask for something, I have an expectation. And then from your point of view, well, you will think, well, this is what is expected of me.
Yeah.
Instead of just kind of clarifying that.
Yeah.
And making sure that we have agreement.
Yeah.
So there's expectation, there's assumption, there's agreement, and I think that those things are very much in any relationship
Yeah.
important to consider.
I'm messing up my glasses. Yeah. Yeah. And we also spoke about it a little bit because it's different to standards. I mean, you have to have a set of standards that are
Yes.
non-negotiables.
Yes.
In terms of how you expect to be treated by someone.
Yes.
Or yeah, I'm not.
So if you check into a 5-star hotel,
Yeah. You can expect
there's
5-star.
there's a certain expectation that goes with that because of the rating, etc., etc. And in relationships as well, yes, there are certain expectations that you will be treated in a certain way. But very quickly that can kind of turn into assumptions.
Yeah.
So I've been looking at, what are the differences between expectations and assumptions. I'm not sure I have a clear-cut definition
Yeah.
of what the difference between the two are. What would you say is the difference between expectation and assumption?
I'm not sure. I hadn't really thought about it. I actually thought they were the same thing. So
No, so the best explanation I found so far is that expectation is what we hope will happen. Wait, let me check that. Assumption is what we wish would happen. So what's the difference between the two?
I'm not sure.
But it's an interesting angle to
Yeah.
think about.
Yeah.
When am I making an assumption and when do I have an expectation?
Yeah. Well, I was also thinking that often our expectations of people can be negative rather than positive, bringing me back to that suffering more in imagination than in reality, where you have those conversations in your head about how a situation is going to go. And very often we expect the worst of people, so we think that they're going to say something very negative, and then you start building up your argument and things like that. And then when you're actually faced with the situation, it's often not at all as bad as you thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and by doing that, you find yourself going into that conversation with a very negative mindset.
Yeah, fists up.
Yeah.
Ready to fight.
Correct.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have a recent experience where I did exactly that.
Yeah.
And I had to check myself, you know, and kind of remind I had to stop myself from doing that.
Yeah.
From playing this conversation out in my head.
Yeah.
I have certain facts, and then based on those facts, I start. And this is another one where, you know, is it an assumption or is it an expectation?
Yeah.
I start making assumptions about what the possible reaction can be, and how I'm going to react to that.
Yeah.
And that's very negative.
Yes. Well, I find very often you get frustrated when the person doesn't respond the way you've anticipated that they're going to, because you had all your arguments formulated, you were ready to give them your point of view, and then they actually are positive or they accept what you're saying, and you think, oh, but this is not how I planned it. I'm not getting to say all of my well-formulated...
all this anger. So... For me, there's also the link between the expectation and not living in the present.
Yeah.
So trying to kind of project towards the future.
Yeah. And that is where anxiety comes from.
That's where anxiety comes from. You can check yourself against that when you find yourself playing out these scenarios in your head. You know, there's a certain level of anxiety that come with that.
Yeah.
And one of the other nice quotes I heard the other day says that E equals PR.
Yeah.
So expectation is predetermined resentment.
That's so heavy.
Which I like.
Yeah.
And I also started using that as a reminder for myself, you know. Especially, you know, like you said, it can often be about a negative outcome that we start anticipating, and that can definitely lead to predetermined resentment
and anxiety.
If you're going to behave like that, or if you're going to say this, then that's what I'm going to say. And you don't want to find yourself in being in the present and being open to different opinions, to you know, somebody else's viewpoint, and so on.
Yeah.
It's important to be present.
Yeah.
And expectation shuts that down.
So how do you kind of stop yourself from expecting certain responses from people? And I mean, because often history is a good way to determine how someone is going to respond in the future. Or is that unfair? Is that saying that you think that people are always going to think a certain way and not change? And
yes, I think it's I think it's unfair.
Okay, so how do you stop yourself from having those conversations in your head and expecting certain things from people? And is there an exercise you can do, or is there?
Well, I don't know.
You
know, I just mentioned that I still find myself doing that. But for me, I just bring myself back to the present and say, listen, this is what I know. These are the facts that I have to deal with. And I just keep reminding myself that, you know, I have, first of all, absolutely no control over the response that I'm going to get.
Yeah.
And there's no ways that you can control anybody else's emotions, reactions, etc. And then just kind of be present.
Yeah.
and be open, listen.
Yeah. Is it not also, I'm just throwing ideas out there, is it not also important to know what your stance on whatever the situation is? To kind of sit with yourself. We spoke about solitude a couple of weeks ago, and to think what is important to me right now, and maybe think about what you would like that perfect outcome to be, and see how you can get there. I'm trying to think like what a good way to deal with it is, because you have to be strong in what you believe. Yeah,
but don't you think that we can also overcome this, or overcome it, I suppose is the correct way to describe it, by making sure that the other person understands what your expectations are.
Yeah. And it also comes back to something we've spoken about before, is the honesty, is being honest about what you think.
Yeah, it's very interesting how these things are kind of so interlinked, and that you can't talk about the one without referring to the other one.
Yeah.
I can think of a very recent example where I had to question somebody's honesty in a situation like that, where I had no way to determine beforehand whether that person was honest with me or not. And it does complicate things. Maybe I overcomplicate it a little bit because I'm so acutely aware of the honesty thing.
Yeah.
But certainly in a workplace scenario, we can very easily overcome it by making sure that we set the expectations correctly.
Yeah.
I'm asking you to do something, making sure you understand by when, making sure you understand enough of the detail of what I want to be done, what the outcome of that would be. And just a simple exercise like that take away so many of the opportunities of the scenarios that you can potentially run through in your mind.
Yeah.
That's something we must implement.
What is that? Asking those questions?
Yes. So
yeah.
So both parties have a responsibility here. This is, if I don't set the expectations well enough, is for the other person to ask those questions.
Yeah.
To make sure that we don't deal with, and this is again where I'm, kind of a little bit torn between expectation and assumption.
Yeah.
Because you can also walk away with certain assumptions, which definitely not expectations, but to ask those questions.
Yeah.
And make sure that we both understand what the expectation is.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's not like we shouldn't have any expectations.
Yeah.
I mean, we certainly have to, but make sure that we clarify.
Yeah. I mean, even as a company in our blueprint, a lot of these things speak to it. So there is the honesty part of it. There's the speak up part of it.
Yeah.
And then very important is the quality, which I think is the standards, that level of expectation, that level of standard that we want to live up to.
And also failing to deal with issues.
Yeah.
If there is something that must be dealt with, deal with it,
Yeah. But like I say, so many of them, just as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of accountability and responsibility, and lots of the elements of our blueprint kind of
planning and preparation.
This. Planning and preparation, yeah. We need to run through those again, because I'm just thinking now, do I remember them all in their correct order?
We'll do a little exercise. We'll do a little challenge.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you very much. Something that we want to try and implement here, the expectations, and must think a little bit about it being, I've been thinking about it a lot because of that quote and trying to understand it properly, that expectation is the opposite of relationship. And when you start having expectations for someone, you're not giving them the opportunity to really be who they are and respond in the way that they respond. Something to think about.
That's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. We all expect people to accept us for who we are and to be allowed to be ourselves. And when we set those expectations or create those expectations, you're 100% correct.
Yeah.
We don't allow other people to be themselves.
Yeah.
And it's so important. It's certainly something that I, in my personal life, and in all the relationships that I have, trying to be very mindful of.
That there's no one else exactly like you that thinks like you and that responds like you do. And the same for all of us. So I think, it's being patient with people and allowing them to be themselves, but also maintaining a standard that you have for your friendships or for your relationships with people. So
not advocating that you compromise on your standards.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, Ali.
Thanks so much.